Welcome everybody back, man. It is day two of the NFL draft. It's here officially, and we're gonna do something a little bit different. All right. I was given the inspiration, I was given the idea to do a video just like this before day two of the draft. And I don't think I've ever done this before, but it's perfect. We usually just talk about targets. But today we're actually going to do a mock draft while also talking about targets based on how the first round unfolded yesterday. So we're going to tie that all together. We'll see how this goes. I'm trying to do this pre-recorded. It's acting a little goofy, but we'll see. We're going to use PFF for this mock draft, but it just gives us an opportunity to talk about different options, different pathways to go if you're the Lions in day two. So let's walk through that. Let's have some discussion here because obviously the Lions walk away with Tyleek Williams and the interior defensive line class right now is really thin. So is the case with the interior offensive line class. Now, interior offensive line wasn't that deep coming into the draft already. So I had projected the Lions were going to select Donovan Jackson at pick number 28. Obviously, they didn't do that because, well, one, they didn't have the chance to do that. Minnesota ended up selecting Donovan Jackson, so that's not an option. But Tyleek Williams does kind of get them in with a player that fits stylistically. Of course, he fits really well stylistically, and it allows them to grab a player at a positional group that was a little bit. I thought there was some legit depth there, but at least towards the top, it was thinning very fast, and teams jumped on it for this year's draft. So now you get in day two, and obviously the conversation is going to be, well, hey, add an edge rusher. And the positive there is there's a lot of edge rushers coming into this draft. It was such a deep room for just edge rushers in general, especially if you're open to taking different styles of edge rushers, right? If you're looking for a certain height, weight, speed kind of thing, then you could be in a smaller bucket. But if you're pretty open minded and you just want a guy that you like, there's going to be a ton of options for the Lions here on day two, and even some into day three as well that they could feel good about. But maybe more so on day two if you want more consistency of being on the field. That being said, at this point, you're probably more of a rotational player year one anyway, and that's okay. So there's that option. And then, of course, there's the offensive line option as well, which I still want to see the Lions address the interior offensive line position. But again, it's just not the strongest group. I do think there's some really nice names here that I like. As you can see, I'm a big Charles Grant guy. I think teams could view him as a tackle, though, and want to just kind of keep him at tackle. So that's understandable. It is a little bit more developmental there when you look at Charles Grant, but I'm just a big fan of him stylistically. And I think he's got a lot of scheme versatility. He's tough. I like all the aspects of his game. Wyatt Millen would be a tall guard, but he'd go from left tackle to left guard. I think that's his best fit at the NFL. Marcus Bowe is a really good athlete, right? You want more consistency in the play strength that he brings, which can be a little bit below average in a couple of different areas. But for the most part, he does move incredibly well. And then that's where you get to the Tate Ratledge, who I have a good grade on. I think he'll go around two. I personally would probably push him a little bit further back, but he's tough as nails, man. He's a well-rounded interior offensive line. We did our full ranking there, and then you got guys like Jonas Savania. You got Miles Frazier, who I really like out of LSU, that I think would fit in stylistically as well, really well. And I think that's where you get to sum up a little bit of a drop off there. But at edge, as you can see, and I only listed my top 15. We have a top 33. My top 15, I mean, there's still a lot of these guys are available. I mean, the order is pretty correct with a lot of these positions. We're not getting a lot of, oh man, this guy went, but I had him 12 on the board. Like, we're not getting much of that. This is all pretty straightforward, kind of what I expected. I think day two will bring more misdirection just because of like a guy like Nick Scorton could absolutely be valued over Jack Sawyer. You consider the age there, you consider maybe some of the upside. Guys like that can kind of shake this thing up. So for me, I would be looking, of course, just best player available. Now, Mike Green is obviously some of the off field stuff, so that kind of throws it off a little bit. But those are two positions I keep my eye on. I'm definitely keeping my eye on as well linebacker, just because of the fact that at the linebacker position, I think you could walk away with, you don't need a starter now, but you could walk away with a starter. And by the way, I just realized that Jahad Campbell is not highlighted there, but Campbell's of course not available. But Demetrius Knight Schwessinger, I think the top end, he's still got two starters there that are sitting on the board. They may be gone though by the Lions' time they get on the board, and then you're looking at the Chris Paul Juniors that I think fits, and then you have a pretty significant drop off for me. And on the other side of the ball, tight end position is a really good spot, and there's depth here. And by the time you're on the board, I mean, you could be looking at your favorite tight end, depending on who that is. Cornerback, of course, having Will Johnson kind of makes it interesting, but there's a lot of names. I thought cornerback was really deep this year, which is what I recognize when putting together this list, is how deep cornerback really is. And then safety really hasn't been touched. Like, safety's in one of these spots where the Lions could just sit there and feel confident, probably at 102, that they're going to get a safety that they like. And I know I have some guys in there for position flexibility. Bowman could be listed as a corner. Noel Williams could be listed as a corner. I like him at safety, but there's a lot of flexibility. Really, you go down to ransom there, and I feel like all of those guys could be year one starters. Now, we don't need that, but they could be. Outside of that, I think there's more developmental traits for a lot of those guys below him, but I feel good there. And the receivers, just Receiver's always pretty deep, but this isn't the strongest receiver class. We're seeing Luther Burden get through. I'm sure he won't last long, but then that's where I get to the range of like, okay, how far does Jack Besh get? How far does Higgins get? Right? How far does Jalen Royals get? Can he get there to 60? Right? And then all of a sudden you have that conversation like who's the best at that spot if that's the case. So very interesting group here, but I think a lot of it kind of went in the order of each position like that I think they should have went in. That said, though, we did get a little misdirection because of how the draft unfolded, like right away, especially with the trade. But just some of the early picks and really the trenches being addressed heavily in Minnesota, kind of capping that off with their selection. So let's go over to PFF right now. Let's take a look at the board and let's try to do a mock draft. Now, I want to talk about this and look at this from two different perspectives, which is the one side of, okay, here's maybe what I would do. And then there's the other side of what I would think the Lions might do, right? There's two different sides to that because schematically that matters, stylistics fit. TJ Sanders versus Tyreek. Tyreek does make more sense stylistically. I like Sanders. I never was completely sure Lions would go after him because of his size, but Tyreek fits better, right? Even though I really like Sanders. So there is some of that that kind of comes into play with all this as well. For me here, though, we get to this spot, and immediately I'm thinking about that edge position, thinking I'm going to be able to get a guy, even if I don't move. The problem is there a guy that I'm focused on that I'm saying I really want to walk away with Nick Score, and I really want to walk away with Braden Swinson. And for me, those are two guys that I'd be willing to target, and I'd be willing to make a small jump. I also think, and we did this mock. The last one of my last mocks that I did is trading back out of 60 should be in consideration as well if you're getting the opportunity to do it, because now you're getting into a spot where it could be for quarterback. It's not for the fifth year option, but it could be, right? Maybe somebody's like, hey, Tyler Shuck's there. Let me go get him. Maybe, a round three pick. Maybe that's someone that's Jalen Milrow still sitting. Let me go get him. But it could be for anything at this point. Now you could just be maneuvering the board because there is so many guys kind of bunched together, at least in my opinion, at some premium positions, you could call it. Cornerbacks, there's a lot of names. You could be looking at potentially trying to get out of 60. And I think that this could make more sense. I always thought it was going to be a struggle to get out of 28 because I just didn't know how the quarterback was going to be able to go to 28. Like a team would go to 28 for a quarterback. I just didn't think that made sense. And even with that being said, Shorter Sanders didn't even go. So, there is that. He'll probably go really early today. That said, though, I'd be looking to get out of 60. I think acquiring more picks could be very valuable. And if you are targeting an edge and you don't really have a guy that like, we have to get him, but we kind of just like the group here, there's enough. There's really, for me, still about 9 players, I would say, maybe somewhere in that range on the board still that I feel like could absolutely give you a year one impact when you just look at that edge rusher position. It's that deep. I didn't list everybody there, but for me, I think it's Swinson, Sawyer, Scorton, Tui Molowow, Jordan Birch, Landon Jackson, Josiah Stewart, probably 6 guys that I feel comfortable, maybe not 9, maybe 6 that I feel pretty comfortable at year one impact. And then you got to get to guys more developmental probably there. But even guys like David Walker can make an impact. Like I think Q Robinson can, even though it's a little more developmental. So I'd feel comfortable with probably jumping out of that spot too. If the Lions want to try to acquire a pick between 130 and 196, that would make sense to me as well. But let's get this draft rolling. I want to see. I just honestly want to see how this thing's going to shake out. I just want to see like what who's going. So Donovan Ezaraku goes immediately. The Trey Amos goes as well. So Ezaraku's off the board. So this may we may start seeing guys flying here. And by the way, I already had Ezaraku listed as he already got selected, which wasn't the case. So it's actually deeper than I guess I thought it was. Right? I had Ezaraku at 5. I had Shamar Stewart at 6. Which, by the way, not a big surprise. Shamar went above Ezaraku. The critical factors there lean Shamar Stewart for sure over Ezaraku. I had Shamar Stewart projected to go 11 to San Fran. That didn't happen, but that doesn't surprise me whatsoever. But Ezaraku jumps off the board immediately. The Lions could have been considering him at their spot. That wouldn't have shocked me either if they were. We know that there was, sounds like there was other guys they were definitely considering. Maybe that was one of the guys they were. Trey Amos goes pretty quickly as well, which makes sense. He had some round one consideration. I think he's one of the cleaner. I think he's one of the cleaner cornerbacks for the this year's draft. So that makes sense to me. Will Johnson goes pretty quickly. Shador Sanders also to Cleveland. That's pretty fun. Mike Green. So someone takes a swing in the second round. That makes sense. And we're getting a little bit of the run on edge rusher here. We're getting a little bit. You can see Landon Jackson ends up going. They have him much higher than I do personally, so I'd be okay with this. But Landon Jackson, I think Landon Jackson would fit the Lions really well. So you go back to a basic thing. I can see the Lions liking Landon a lot. And I think if his ranking is closer to my board than versus their board, I think he'll get to the range of 60. I think he'll get relatively close. And I think that could allow the Lions to jump if they wanted to go that route, even if they want to just feel comfortable, like, hey, we like Landon, let's go up. I don't think you'd have to get up to 39 to go get Landon Jackson. I could be wrong. I don't think he's that player. So we'll see. But I think he would fit the Lions pretty well. I think he'd fit better than Mike Green just based on who they typically would target and who they would go after. But that It takes Landon Jackson off the board, and that would put me, and that's again, that's my edge 12. So I'd still have Birch, I still have Tui Molowa, I still have Scorton, I still have Swinson, I still have Sawyer. All of those guys are still sitting on the board for me right now. So I still feel really strong at this spot, considering we're already at 44. Safety finally is kind of getting some guys. Nicky Manwari goes, we get Xavier Watts off the board. I'm personally super high on Jalen Reed. He's my number 3 safety, but I think with some of the depth combined with kind of where the rankings are, I would be comfortable with waiting, right? I'd be comfortable with waiting. But at the same time, I think once you get past the Jalen Reed, who I think is going to go kind of early, then you're kind of moving into that next group. And that's okay with where the Lions are at, but you're losing in more developmental group, I think, than anything. So if you wanted to impact right now, maybe you jump on it, you don't wait. You're just like, let's not play around with it. Let's end up just getting up there now while we have the opportunity. So to me, this spot on the board uh, is an interesting spot. It feels just a little bit too early right now to jump. And as we can see, we're really not getting offensive linemen going off the board at this point either. So to that extent, again, if you want a lineman, that may have to be your next pick just to ensure that you can get that piece. But into your offensive lineman isn't really going right now. So I'm going to let this run a little bit more. Tight end, of course, becomes a conversation because you could have your top tight end available. And kind of like Tyleek. Like Tyleek could have been one of Lions' top interior defensive linemen, just based on the play style, based on how kind of congested that group was. I don't think there was a clear standout outside of Mason Graham, so he could have been their number 2 defensive tackle. That wouldn't have shocked me. So we got Nick Scorton, JT Tuimoloau. Also, now they're starting to jump off the board right here, and I would say you get to about 50, right? 52. And by the way, Kevin Winston Jr., another guy, I had my number 2 safety in this class. Don't know Lions would go that route. I think he'd fit. I just don't know Lions would go that route, mainly because, you have the injuries coming off of, but I think that's okay. But some people don't like his feel as much. So JT goes, Scorton goes. So you take those 2 off the board. And now the edge rusher position without Scorton and JT would leave me with Sawyer, Birch, Josiah Stewart. I'm kind of into that group now, and I'd still feel comfortable with that group. Personally, I think for the Lions, Josiah Stewart stands out. I think, was my predictive mock that they would take Josiah. It still makes a lot of sense that they would go after Josiah Stewart, so that still is an absolute option for the Lions. So I'm going to let it roll now. I kind of want to do this without trading because at this point, I think I would be trading up to ensure that I get my edge. If that's the case, that's the only reason I trade up. Otherwise, I'd be trading for a lineman, maybe, but I don't know that there's a guy that's going to go before our spot. I think Wyatt Millum could get up there realistically. I know on PFF he won't. I think realistically Wyatt Millum could go off the board. I think Charles Grant should have a case. Don't know that he will, but I think he should have a case, especially if you're looking at him as a tackle, that you'd have some stronger value in that kind of pick specifically. So we're going to resume the draft. So I couldn't see the draft thing. We're resuming the draft here. Jack Besh, Darius Alexander. So we don't need that now. Trey Harris, TJ Sanders goes. Princely Uman Yellen, which again could be a different piece for that spot. I'm just not as high as Princely Uman Yellen. So that puts us on the board here. Tate Ratledge did go if the Lions want to go that direction. I think that's a potential range for Tate Ratledge. Again, I don't have him that high, but I think that's a conversation that he could get there. And with the receiver position, Trey Harris just going is understandable. By the way, did he go to Green Bay? Yeah, Green Bay took Trey Harris and Matthew Golden. That's kind of weird, but I guess it could. It just doesn't make a ton of sense, I guess. I don't know. But that leaves me at receiver in a good spot because for me, if we're looking at receiver here and we're looking at, hey, just go best player available, a similar grade that I had at Tyleek Williams was Jalen Royals. They weren't far off. And at this point, Higgins is off the board. Jack Besh is off the board. So my next up, Luther Burns off the board, is Jalen Royals. He'd be my top receiver here. And then followed by Kyle Williams. He'd fall into that conversation as well, followed by Jalen Knoll. Would kind of jump in there as well. So 3 receivers that I like are there. If you want to get one of these, you probably should take them and not move, right? That'd probably be your spot to do it. If you do move, you're not going to get one of those. I don't hate some of the depth here. I think there's pieces that you can like towards the back end. It's not outstanding as a receiver group, but there's pieces you could like. Of course, Demetrius Knight for me is a player that I love, so I would be willing to draft him. I just don't know that the Lions would be willing to take Demetrius Knight. I think they'd have a different sense on him a little bit specifically. And then at the safety position, again, this is a spot where you can still get guys that I think you can absolutely view as starters here. You can still potentially go that route. Makuba absolutely falls into that. Ransom could be a starter. He wouldn't be for us, but he could be. Sanker could be a starter for me. Jalen Reed is a starting level safety. So you still got a nice little group there of about 4 safeties that I feel good about. I just don't know that you jump that soon to it. And that's of course when you get to edge, which everybody talks about. I'm way lower on Ivy. They have him here. I have him in my 20s. I don't really understand this one, but we'll see. I mean, the traits are there, I guess. Oladejo again, I have him edge 20, so we're pretty different on that one. But Stewart is the one guy that actually makes sense for me because it's not just that I think the Lions would be interested in adding him because of what he can bring as just a rusher and his toughness and the way that he plays the game, but it's also the fact that for the Lions' sake, grading wise, he also fits in here. He makes sense. He fits the board. And Jack Sawyer is another guy that I actually have above Josiah Stewart. I just could see him falling because of some of the critical factors not matching up. For me, the better pass rusher is Josiah Stewart by a full grade point here. But obviously, Sawyer brings a little bit more of the play strength to the table if you're looking for that as an edge. And Jack Sawyer, to me, is one of the smarter edge rushers in this year's draft. So you think about football intelligence, Rand, you think about kind of going after guys like that. We saw this yesterday, like those guys that have that quality, like the high FBI players are typically what the Lions are going to go after. If you think of players like that, I think Jack Sawyer does fall in that conversation. Based on their ranking, Sawyer is going to probably go third round here. So that would, I mean, it's interesting, but you might be able to just sit back and get him. You might be able to make a small trade up if you really wanted to ensure that you could end up letting that pick. Based on the PFF board, I would probably end up just trying to trade back at this spot because of what's there and how I know their board is going to likely fall. I'd probably try to get out of this spot. Jack Sawyer ended up grabbing a good football intelligence grade for me with good discipline and great toughness, a high motor. So all of those things kind of lead to like, yeah, it makes sense. It would make sense that the Lions would like that kind of piece, but I would try to get out of this spot personally. And I ended up clicking this as a 4 round mock. Let's see if someone's interested. Chargers at 86. I wouldn't go that far back. So if I had to wait till 86, I just wouldn't trade back. I think 86 is too big of a jump, but I'm not mad at moving back from the spot. So yeah, I think for me, my guess would be the Lions would stay home here. They would take Josiah Stewart and they keep it moving. They just don't want to risk missing that guy. Again, the only question is offensive line because if you do wait and you don't go offensive line here for me, you're missing out on potential real starters. I think Marcus Bowe is going to be off the board unless you move up. I think that Jonah Savania is going to be off the board, which is okay with me. I'm not as high as Jonah, but I know a lot of teams could like him because of his flexibility. That's for sure. Wyatt Millum, Charles Grant, a guy that I really like. I ended up mocking the Lions taking Jamari Caldwell with 102, but I obviously we got our interior guy, so that doesn't make any sense anymore. So I could actually see what I think would be interesting for the Lions is going Josiah here because the drop back is too far, and then potentially trying to get a little bit aggressive to go get up and get your offensive lineman. Maybe you can get a kickback if you give up 130. Maybe you can get a kickback later and potentially try to grab that safety pick. It's why trading back would make a ton of sense as well, but I could see that kickback trying to get that. Um, I think White Millum would be a good fit for the Lions. I think he would make a lot of sense for the Lions specifically. And if I go to my Wyatt Millum grades specifically here, for me, Wyatt Millum, who is a easy mover to the second level, accelerates well, brings some dog as a finisher, strong hand usage. That'd be someone that I think the Lions could look to kind of try to jump up and grab as some of these offensive linemen rather than just kind of letting them fall through. So I would consider something like that if I'm the Lions is trying to jump up and get one of these pieces from that 102 spot and seeing if you can get some kind of kickback on the back end. So yeah, we're gonna see here. We're gonna take Josiah Stewart. I'm gonna be a little bit chalk here with this pick, but he also kind of just lines up with what the fit is. I don't think anybody else stands out on the board outside of Jalen Reed. For me, Jalen Reed would be the pick, probably based on value here, but based on the board, I don't think it makes sense to go here. So we're gonna take Josiah Stewart. We're gonna stick to our original prediction and just kind of lock that in. And now it's about, hey, do we get aggressive, right? I think receiver could be in play if you just kind of sit back and wait. And then it's like, do we get aggressive for alignment? As we can see, we had Savania go already to Cleveland. So offensive line gets a little bit more thin now at this spot. But you got to find the right spot because you're going from 102. So that's such an aggressive move up for the Lions here that you take him off the board. You Ratledge off the board. You got Marcus Bowe, Wyatt Millum, Charles Grant. Those are the guys. Miles Frazier would be next up. Those three, though, would be those three for me that I would be after. And I think all of them could make sense for the Lions in their own way. I think all those players could be understandable draft picks for the Lions in their own way. So I'm going to kind of let it roll a little bit further. We'll kind of see where we get with the offensive linemen here when they start going off for Collins, Norman Lott. We finally get Makuba off the board, but again, Reed won't even go in this mock, so I feel pretty comfortable with where we're at here. Shamar Turner goes, Jordan Birch now goes, so okay, edge rusher. That's why we could have moved back based on their board. We actually probably could have went to 86 based on their board and made this happen. Now Marcus Bowe goes off the board, so now this is when I probably start making calls because you take Bowe out, now you're at Millum, now you're at Charles Grant. I would want to try to make calls here. I think the Chargers would probably pass on alignment, but I could see them also wanting alignment. They just have a lot of picks, so I don't know that we could give them the value that they would want here. So if I tried to go up with them, I would have to throw them 130. I would want a kind of a kickback, like hopefully, and then maybe I could throw something either on a future pick, which I think teams are going to like, or maybe something now that teams would be interested in. Maybe I could give them like a get like 181 back in return, giving them 130, and then I could try to give them like a future pick that would make this thing interesting. But it looks like we're gonna have to wait. They're not gonna want to move here at all. So we'll let this thing drop a little bit. Let's get here. They need offensive line, so getting above them would make sense. They're probably gonna take one here. They didn't. Okay, so for us, here's where I start to have the conversation to try to get up for sure. I would be kind of aggressive at this spot just because of who I'm talking to here. If I gave them 130, it's not really a good kickback though. Like I can't really get much in return here. I would honestly want to try to hold 130. Maybe I could throw a future pick and get this thing done. Something like this might be what I could pull off. I would also talk to Baltimore because I do have two guys that I like here. I would look at Baltimore. Baltimore could give me Baltimore could give me 176, which is somewhat interesting. I don't like going back that far if I'm not getting anything else, but it's a conversation we could have. Like we could look into that. This might be a spot where you have to give a future pick, but teams are going to be valuing future picks, I think, at this spot in the draft. So I think that's where I'd kind of start the conversation is like, hey, we might have to get into looking at future picks. Let's go with the Rams here. We're gonna talk to the Rams. We're gonna get up to make sure that we can go our direction we want to go here. And that means that I'm gonna be a somewhat aggressive, but not like overly aggressive with this spot. I think that I would have to just throw a future pick to try to get this thing done. And to me, I just don't think the kickback makes sense. Like this is a deal I'd be willing to throw to a team. Would a team be willing to take it? Maybe because they'd still get a late pick and a future pick. This is something I'd be willing to offer. I'll throw the offer. We'll see if it happens. It did happen. So that puts me back on the board. And now for me, the clear cut move is to try to go to the offensive line. Go to the offensive line, get your guy, kind of get out, right? That's I would be willing to give a fifth, knowing that I have a third coming back next year. I'm gonna have two thirds next year. I'd be willing to do this. And you got Millam and you got Grant. I personally have a higher grade on Grant, but I think stylistically, maybe Millam would make more sense for the Lions. Grant could have some real tackle flexibility, which makes him even more interesting. Millam obviously played tackle. I just think he's gonna go to guard, and I think he'll struggle a little bit more. I think he'll struggle a little more at that position. So again, this is a tough one because I would lean Grant at this spot personally. I think the Lions could lean Millam just because of his play style, the toughness that he brings to the table. This is a weird one for me. I think I'm gonna go Grant just because to me, Grant's the higher player. So I just stick to my board personally, and I don't know what the Lions board is going to look like. So I'm just gonna stick to my board. I think I'm gonna take Charles Grant here and just kind of leave it at that. I think I'm going to take Charles Grant, kind of jump up, get my guy. And Wyatt Millam's interesting, but I'm going to take Charles Grant. I think either one could be in play. I'm going to take Grant. Feel really good about that. A guy that I think is incredibly talented for guard. I think if I put Charles Grant at the guard position, he'd be really good. His athleticism may take a little time. I love the toughness, the way that he finishes, his movement skills, the scheme flexibility. He's just one of my favorites here. I think he's got a conversation to be one of the better players. I don't think he would last this far realistically, but if I could potentially pull this trade off and go up and get him, I'd feel really comfortable. Now, I put 130 in here because I didn't know, even though we're not doing day three, I didn't know if that's a pick that I could acquire. I obviously gave it my fifth, so that puts me in a spot where I didn't have to get this up. I just thought that might have to be the moving piece. But if it's not, so now you get Sanker off the board. So now you're kind of getting to that safety run potentially. And Billy Bowman goes like this is where I would want to jump into that safety conversation or linebacker, right? This is where or wide receiver, right? This is where I would kind of be probably turning my attention based on who's here. Torrey Horton for me, based on my board. Let's see who's available. So yeah, Torrey Horton, I would have personally, I would have Ty Felton above him. I would have Ty Felton above him, and I'd have also connected. I have Bryant here from Illinois would be kind of my other connected piece. So both of those guys are still available. That's something I'd be fine with. Like, hey, go get Felton, go get Bryant, go get Horton, one of those three. I would personally lean Grace on my grades, Ty Felton, but I think the Lions would probably go Bryant. That's also a guy I projected to go there. I also projected they would draft Jalen Reed as well, and they have him ranked kind of in this area. For me, grade wise, Jalen Reed is a standout piece. Everybody else here is interesting. You get some flexibility, but the guy that has starting potential, the guy that fits flexibility guy wise, the guy that's from Michigan is Jalen Reed. I would take Jalen Reed probably at the spot to go get my depth at safety. And then at receiver, I could sit back and get someone that I like. Maybe not someone that I love. I could go look at a Lambert Smith potentially as someone that we like back here. I do like Wells as well. It's not the strongest group if we likely wait until, when we pick next, which is going to be in the 200. So now I have to make that decision. Like, who do we value more? Do we value the safety? Do we value the receiver? I prefer lean the safety at this spot. And then I would look at the linebacker position as well, because I'm pretty sure Chris Paul would still be on the board. Um, well, actually, Chris Paul probably isn't on the board. Looking at it now, he's probably not on the board. Yeah, for me, next up would be Samil Mondon, would be my next player here. I don't think there's a great fit for this spot. So for me, I would just keep this thing simple. Take two guys that I already projected the Lions would draft, and I guess that makes sense. And I would take Jalen Reed to kind of wrap this thing up. And I think he'd be a good fit. Obviously, he's already kind of in the area, so this makes sense. Q Robinson's a nice, interesting option if that was the case there. I think he'd be a good fit for us as well. That'd be a good spot to get him. That's just how deep edge is. That's what I'm saying. If you can get out of 60, get out of 60. You can get your lineman there. Maybe take your lineman. Don't move. Make sure you get your lineman here, because I think it makes sense to go lineman. And if you want to wait on edge, right? You don't have to do it. Everybody's going to be clamoring for it. You don't have to do it. I know I did it, but you don't have to, because if you're going to wait on lineman, as you can see, I had to move up to get mine. I don't even know if you'd be able to pull it off. Those guys may fly just because of where the board's at. If teams need it, they're not going to wait. So as you can see, that wraps us with Josiah Stewart. We had to get aggressive, went up and get Charles Grant here, giving a 196, 102. We held on to 130, which was our safety pick. We had to give up a future fifth, and we got a future third coming back next season. And hopefully that future fifth isn't incredibly valuable next year. I don't think it will be, but hey, next year's draft, people are going to want to pick stairs. So that's how this goes. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see what happens. Tonight's going to be crazy. Expect some movement. Trade back makes sense to me. And we'll see how it all shakes out. I'm going to leave it there, man. Join me for our live stream tonight, day 2 of the draft, over here on Dose of Dion and Roundtable Sports.